guys, Mama Star Fox here. Another vlog in my car, 'cause that's the time I got to do it. Sitting in my driveway while the kitties are having a little nap. I just have this is a warning, a trigger warning for this video because I'm going to talk about my miscarriage, my first pregnancy. So, just to let you know, because I know when I see stories about miscarriages, it takes me back to that, and it really sets me into that dark hole a lot. But yeah, I wanted to talk about it because it is a traumatic event in my life that it still affects me now with my anxiety, especially towards my kids. So and my depression too, because I felt like I failed my first child, and I felt like I did something horribly wrong. But anyway, I'll get into that. I'm just gonna start with the story, and it was in 2014. I was in my second semester of my first year of nursing school when, in March, I went to my doctor and took a test and found out I was pregnant. And it was after my boyfriend kept telling me, like, you gotta take a test, and I could not bring myself to go to a store and buy a pregnancy test because I was 18 going on 19 at the time, and we were just together a year, and we live in a small town where everybody knows everybody else, so I was scared it would get around. So I went into the confidentiality of my doctor's office, and the first thing that my doctor said was, you have a couple options. There's abortion, there's adoption after birth, and then there's, you know, the regular, you go through pregnancy and birth and you have your baby. And that, I was so shocked at the time that I didn't have an answer for her, though I knew in my heart that I knew I was gonna keep the baby. I would never forgive myself, and it would be on my mind for the rest of my life if I had an abortion or if I gave the baby up for adoption. Because though we didn't have our own place and we were so young, we had supportive, stable family and everything, so. But I am very pro-choice. Everybody has their own choice to their own body, and those should be options for people so that they don't feel like they're trapped in a corner type thing. And but yeah, and it was a mixture of, I was excited for myself because I always knew I wanted to have kids, but it was also, I was terrified of what my family would think. I knew my grandparents would be okay, and my mom would be okay or neutral, because my grandparents had my dad at age of 17, so it was kind of like we can't say anything, we had them younger than you were. And my parents had my sister when they were 19/20, so I knew my mom would be okay, but I knew my dad is the person. My mom, I know, like, she tells me that, like, yes, I want to impress my mom and I want to make my mom proud, but it was most with my dad, because I don't know why, it was just a feeling that I didn't want to disappoint him, and I didn't want to make him mad. And so he was the one that was at the office with me. He didn't know what I went in for, and I didn't tell him. I actually didn't get the nerve to tell him in general. My mom actually told him, and he was more upset that I didn't tell him myself than he was about the pregnancy, though he was pretty disappointed that I was so careless. And anyway, I'll get into that after what happened. But yeah, so I begged him to drop me off at Tyler's. I didn't tell him why. I just said I want to go to Tyler's. I had a bad day. I really want to go to Tyler's, which is my boyfriend. And immediately threw myself in Tyler's arms and cried because I was so scared. to tell everybody and what they would think and what it would mean for us, and it was more about what I thought people would think. And so I called my mom after telling Tyler, and she was very neutral about it. She was like, so what are you gonna do? And I knew I wanted to keep leaving, and I told her that. I was like, and she said, you're gonna have to tell your father. But obviously, like I said, I didn't get the nerve to tell him. And my grandmother was another person I was scared to tell, because she was very judgmental about my parents having my sister at age 19/20. So me being 18 going on 19, I was very, very scared. Though I wasn't, as I know there's people way younger than that who've had kids and have been fine, but it was just, you know, so much going on, and like starting university, and I was only with my boyfriend for a year at the time, and so I was very, very worried about what everyone was going to say. And I only told my family and my friends. My friends were very supportive. They were like, whatever you decide, we're with you. And that was a big relief. And I didn't tell anybody at school. I didn't put it on the internet because it was, one, it was so early on, and two, I didn't really want to broadcast it. I didn't want that judgment or anything, so I was very excited. And early on, we had an early ultrasound to date my pregnancy, and because I wasn't sure when my last period was exactly, and we ended up finding out we were due in November. And early on, I think it was in April, I was spotting, and I didn't know what a miscarriage was then. I just looked up and knew that it wasn't necessarily normal. And I told my OBGYN about it, and they sent me for an ultrasound. And to my relief, there was a heartbeat, and it was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. And it made me so much more excited seeing physically the baby and hearing the baby's heartbeat, that I got so much, I was so ecstatic. All of that worry melted away once I saw and heard the baby. And which made everything so much more painful. And there were other girls too at my work who were pregnant. I worked at McDonald's at the time. It came in threes, scarily, and it happened with my other pregnancies too. But I'll get to that. So I asked them about a lot of things, like because they were women who were older than me, and they were pregnant, and it made it more exciting because I wasn't alone being pregnant. There was other people at work who were, and I could bounce experiences off of and stuff. So there was one day, I remember it very vividly, at work, and I went to the bathroom, and I was having cramps, and I was bleeding like massive amounts, and I was terrified. And I called my mom, and I told my boss, I was like, I have to leave. And I called my mom, and she picked me up, and I went with Tyler, and we went to the ER, and we waited quite a long time to get in. Our ER is usually pretty long to get seen. And so they checked, and they said my mucus plug was gone, and you're a little bit open, but that might not mean anything, so we'll do an ultrasound. It's probably fine. And so I went for the ultrasound, and this time I knew something was wrong because the lab tech didn't tell me anything. She was very quiet, she was very stoic, she, like, no expression on her face, and didn't show me the monitor like she did the time in April. So I knew deep down that something was wrong. Though I tried to keep up the hope that everything was fine. I was looking up things and being like, okay, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, because at the time I was such a young nursing student and we had such a vague sex education when we were in junior high that I didn't know about miscarrying. I thought, in my mind, it was like pregnant meant you were pregnant, you had a baby, that was it. And I thought it was very rare to miscarry and to have stillborn, stuff like that. So, but it's actually 1 in 4. So I was the 1 in 4. And so after the ultrasound, we waited in the ER waiting room for probably an hour or so before the doctor came and got us to go there into a room, and it ended up being my relative who was a doctor, and I felt so bad that she had to tell me, but she told me that the baby stopped growing at 8 weeks, and I was 10 weeks along in May, and she told me the baby stopped growing at 8 weeks, and I was going to miscarry. There was no heartbeat, and I was in so much shock, and I was so broken at that point that the only thing I could get out was, will I be able to get pregnant again in the future? And she said, yes, there should be no problem. It was just, I had no idea what to do, what to say. They didn't tell me what to expect, and I think it was because of the dread on my face and how heartbroken I was. They just couldn't bring themselves to tell me what was going to happen. So, and I didn't know what to ask. So they left me in that room with Tyler, and I just cried and cried and cried until I was like, we have to leave this room. I'm taking up space here. I can't. We have to go. So we called his mother, and I remember very vividly sitting in his mom's backseat with Tyler and laying my head on his legs and just crying and sobbing and heaving and crying and just nonstop. And that was it for a pretty solid week. I stayed at Tyler's, and I told everybody. I was able to bring myself to tell them what happened, but I stayed at his house for a long time and was just constant crying, and his mom was pretty upset too, and until I ended up going home at one point, and it took me a while, I think it was a week, until I actually miscarried. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I was bleeding, and I just got up to go like change, and it immediately all came out, and it was just a mess. And I ran to the bathroom and sat on the toilet and just was in so much pain. I thought I was going to die. I called my parents and was like, I think I'm dying. Like, it was so excruciating, and I kept bleeding and bleeding, and I went in the shower because I was like, I'm just gonna keep bleeding, and it's not stopping, and because I didn't know what to expect. Nobody told me, and I didn't know about labor or anything yet, and so I kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding, and I was on the floor, and once it slowed down, I was on the floor crying and holding myself and screaming because it was so painful. And I remember my mom saying, and I know she didn't mean any harm by it, but she said, imagine what labor would have been like, because that's what labor feels like, except worse because you're delivering a baby, and a full-grown baby. And at the time I was like thinking in my head, why would you say that? Because it's in labor and delivering, you're delivering most of the time a healthy baby. There's a positive outcome at the end of that. So, and this is not. So I'm going to be shattered and in so much pain and crying and screaming and saying, why would the universe do this to me? Why would this happen to me? Because it was, nothing good was coming from what was happening. And to this day, I feel so horrible that I couldn't dig my baby out of all of that blood and clots. I didn't know where to start, and I was in such a panic and shock and survival mode that I just flushed the toilet, and I didn't think until later, and it still crushes me to this day that I didn't give my baby, no matter how young she was or he was, a proper burial. But I did, though I don't know if it was a girl or a boy. I did, obviously it wouldn't have had features by then, but I did have a name for him/her, and it would have been Atlas or Ella Grace. So, and Grace was to honor my best friend's niece who passed away before that pregnancy. I was planning on naming my baby with her name in it anyway when I had all those plans. Yeah, sorry, this is very, very sad. But I'm running out of time on my phone, so there'll be a part 2 coming, and probably a part